So we're going to do Scorpio. So this week and next week, today we're going to do Pluto, Scorpio, and next week we're going to do the Black Moon Lilith, Scorpio. It falls in, although there's a little difference with Lilith and Black Moon, but it fits the sort of context and the energy of the dark, the devil, the desire, the shadow aspects. So oftentimes they're clumped together. So Lilith is an asteroid. It's actually a non-existent spot, actually. It's called the apogee, where it's like the darkest spot, because it's like not even existent. We can't even access it. That's what's so scary about it. But it falls into the Pluto sort of philosophy, psychology. So we'll start there, and then we'll focus on Pluto, and then we'll look at some of the charts. Now, all of you know me. I go dark, I go deep, I go the worst case scenario. There are many layers to the Pluto in your chart. We're going to start with sort of that shadow, desire, deadly sin, vice aspect, and then of course extrapolate out to the house and the sign on multiple layers. But it really is that point in your chart that is about your desire, your shadow, and darkness. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to share something from our consciousness coaching program. So when I talk about the consciousness coaching and in terms of how the psyche develops, it's with these 3 planets. So Genesis says, and then there were 3. And the 3 that I'm talking about are the 3 brothers, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. So let's go to mythology for a moment. When Saturn is dethroned, because Zeus dethroned him, the world is split into 3. Zeus gets the biggest part. Okay, so Jupiter in our chart, the abundance, the good luck, the happy. Zeus has now morphed into the word Deus, which turns into Dios, which is God. And we'll get to that in Sagittarius. Then Neptune gets the oceans. And he's like Poseidon, Neptune, who we think of the oceans that run all of the water on Earth. And then the underworld is assigned to Pluto. So this is our hell. This is our devil. And we all have a devil in our chart. We love our devil because our devil keeps us in check. And so these 3 archetypes work very closely together in our charts. When we start doing aspects, we'll see. But if you are the God, right, there's a version of you that's divine, you can't get the whole piece of the pie, right? So this idea of I want to be happy and things are always going wrong. And one of the concepts we understand in astrology is there's always some place where Jupiter is, but there's always a place where Saturn or Pluto is. So you can't be happy or have it all of the time, okay? Partly because of the way that these planets traverse through our chart in transits, and also the way that they're laid out in the chart in your head. So if you can't have all heaven all of the time, then of course there's an aspect of you that's a victim. But the victim is absolutely in cahoots with the devil. In order to be a martyr, in order to be a victim and need a savior, you need a devil, you need a criminal in your psyche, in your life. And wherever Pluto is going to be where that recurrently shows up. It could be a person, a place, a thing, a situation, an illness, depending obviously on the house that it's located. So we really need to understand that we, for self-preservation, need a devil. Because if you need to own your victim or you need to maintain your victim stance, then you must be able to blame someone, right? That person, that place, that thing, that situation, that illness, that bankruptcy, that accident, that thief shows up with your Pluto. In your natal chart, it's going to be obviously by house and by sign. In transits, it'll be how it reflects with all the other placements, and in aspects, how it's going to talk to all the other planets. And in transits, when we do transits, then we'll see, and there's a very, very specific way to do a Pluto transit, okay? Pluto is also what's known as a generational planet. So is Neptune, so is Jupiter. Jupiter a little less so. Saturn and Jupiter sometimes are personal, sometimes they're generational, but they're really more generational because the time that it takes to go through the whole zodiac. And if you go to your speed of the planets, you'll see that Pluto takes 12 to 24 years to go through an entire cycle. So I think we have several different ones here. I'm a Libra and Jen's a Libra. I don't know if Sharon's a Pluto Virgo, and Nicole, you might be a Scorpio, or you're a Libra too. I'm not really sure. So you're going to see generationally, Pluto is going to be one of those planets because it's the god of the underworld, of hell, of destruction, of the criminal, that the crime or the criminal in a generation is linked directly to the sign, forget the placement in the person's chart, but the sign in which the Pluto is located. So in my generation, it's Libra. Marriage was height of divorce. We got to 50% divorce rate. No one wanted to be married. You do you, boo, and all the nonsense. And since then, we've followed that trajectory. And I think now we're up to Capricorn. Our next group is going to be Aquarius in a couple years, 2 years, I think. So that generation is inheriting all the chaos, Pluto in Aquarius. Supposedly that's supposed to be the generation that fixes it all, but I have reservations with that commentary. But we'll go through the ones that you will only see in a client. You're not going to see anything past Virgo, for instance. I doubt anyone's going to know anyone with Pluto Leo. Maybe Pluto Leo is the last one, but I can't imagine anyone knows anyone with a Pluto Cancer. But again, I'm not sure on the ages, so I could be wrong, but there's only a section of people that are going to show up in your practice or in your life that have within 3 or 4 signs or something. Think of 20 years each, 80, 100. So you're dabbling with 4 or 5. So we'll see who, and Sharon, you're the oldest in the group, so we'll see what yours is at. And that'll be kind of like the cutoff, maybe one prior. So each generation also has a meaning of the crime of the generation, or the thing that they must destroy in that generation, so that the next one and the next one and the next one has something to do. So earlier this year, there was a big changing of the gods video series, and they were talking all about Pluto and Uranus, and we're in this now. So now we're going to focus on Pluto, but that's where you start to see that all of the societal events, economic events, generational events are dictated, Pluto being one of them, one of the major ones. So Pluto mythologically is the god of the underworld and god of hell, or bottom of the earth, sort of like what we would visually see as hell or the underworld. But in our psyche, it is our devil. What does Pluto represent? Manipulation, power, control, all the things that we say are bad, bad, bad. That is why we destroy through that sign in that generation. We've deemed that to be bad, Pluto. Add the sign, I'll just use Libra for marriage as a basic word, and then that was what needed to be destroyed, the structure of traditional marriage, so to speak. And you could do the same thing with any generation. And then the person's individuality will come in the house, and of course the aspects to other planets. So that's sort of like the psychology or the mythology linked to that. But it is something that must be destroyed. So let's talk, this is the first myth, so you can understand in context how we need a devil in order to stay victim, in order for God to save us. One of the things you will see quite a bit, I don't know if I have it in this, hold on, because this is important. This is from my archetype map. Each archetype or each planet has a pair, and the pair with Neptune is Pluto, and I'll share a story. I have this image. I use it so much and I don't have it anywhere easily, but this is a bad one. But anyway, it's ugly, but it's pretty much, it's the circular one that I show. This is where we're talking. This is your victim and this is your devil. So I have a client whose mother keeps getting sick. She's gotten several cancer diagnoses, autoimmune, heart issues. She's constantly getting sick. This person is a devout Christian. The illness is the devil. And in order for her to be admitted into heaven, which is her belief system, Jupiter, she creates an illness that God saves her from. And she is working her way up to salvation, entrance into heaven. Because if God doesn't kill me, then that means that I must be a good person and I'm going to be allowed into heaven. So these archetypes are very, very rooted in whether you've practiced religion or not. They're in our collective unconscious. They are stored in our psyche as I'm being punished. That's a big commentary with people. I'm being punished. Tribal cultures, a lot of cultures believe that if a family gets like AIDS, when the AIDS epidemic, oh my God, those are bad people, bad, they did something in a lineage. So we cannot ignore, even though we're not doing ancestral astrology until level 4, you cannot ignore that these belief systems are deeply rooted into. And I'll bring you just for a moment to the Old Testament. The Abrahamic traditions are all rooted on one story. God saved Isaac. Abraham was supposed to kill his kid. And basically God saved him, but God said, you owe me. And that's at the core of our psyche. You owe me. It's called the covenant. It's in the Bible. We hold ourselves to that. And so whether we're religious or these cultures are trying to eliminate, as in modern day religion, these things, these myths, these stories are stored in our archetypes. And if you believe in past lives, then you've lived many times with these stories in some way in your psyche. So having an understanding of mythology and religion and how the psyche is set up is very important in astrology, because it helps you understand why people create the devil that they do and why the devil can show up in many ways in that one house. Okay. So the victim needs the devil, because if no one robs your car or destroys your marriage or does something negative to you, then you can't stay human and emotional and victim, and then God can't come and save you, right? So this is sort of like what we pay, the punishment. So any questions on that? Okay. So let's talk a moment about, and there's many myths with Pluto. I'm going to just use the main one and you have that video. The main myth with Pluto is the rape of Persephone. This is a very important myth in our psyche, okay? Demeter and Persephone are mother and daughter. They're frolicking in the woods, in the gardens, living their best life. However, the mother Demeter keeps Persephone intoxicated with a narcissus flower so that she really never knows what fully is going on. That's your Neptune. That's your snow globe metaphor. If you do not individuate from your parent, and it does not mean leaving home physically, it means leaving home here, which is the purpose of Pluto in the chart, you stay a child. So in the map, I showed spiritual adult is part of this section. When we're ripped from our parents, and the word that's used in the myth, and people don't like it, but it's the word used in the myth, is rape. When you are raped from your innocence, Neptune, your childhood home. Doesn't mean that everybody has a great childhood home. That's not what I'm saying. But when you're ripped from that innocence, immediately Hades or Pluto shows up. Why? Persephone wanted very badly to be a grown-up, but she didn't have permission and she didn't know how. And every single one of us are raped by Pluto in our chart because we don't know how to get permission and we don't know how to grow up. So Pluto, this devil, this criminal, this Satan, in one way is what helps us. But then, of course, there's the dark, destructive shadow aspect that can harm us if we don't learn to balance. And I'll explain the half in a minute. And we'll look through the glyph so you can see the glyph. So Persephone is raped. She's taken into the underworld. Unfortunately, there are placements in the chart where there is Pluto, for instance, in the 8th, that can absolutely be a literal rape of the person. So this is as literal as symbolic and metaphoric. Okay, especially if it's retrograde. So Persephone is now in the underworld, and she doesn't know that there is a rule. There's always a rule to pay. You always pay when you go to the underworld, always. Hence the covenant of you owe me, right? If God is supposed to save you, then you have to pay up. And she eats 6 pomegranate seeds. She doesn't know that there is a rule that if you eat something in the underworld, you belong to Hades, that you are now the wife of Hades. So she goes down there, she eats the pomegranate seeds. Demeter, of course, is so sad. The birds stop chirping, the flowers start growing, no more fruit on the trees. And Jupiter comes down and says, hey, guy, you got to help me out here. Like everyone's dying on Earth. And one thing Pluto hates is a lot of people in his space. So there's a lot of places in the chart where you have Pluto, you are like, get away. I do not like people. I want my secluded little land. Okay. And bottom line, power and control. I decide who comes in and out of the underworld in my chart, in my head, in my world. Right. So you start to find the nuances of how the person shows up in the world in these myths. That's why they're so important to really understand the minutia of the myths. So Pluto is not like that. He's like, oh, hell no, I decide who comes down here. And Jupiter's like, okay, so notice Jupiter comes, negotiates, saves Persephone and Demeter, right? So you could start to see the interplay of how these gods work together in your psyche. And he's like, okay, I'll make a deal. She ate 6 pomegranate seeds and she can go to Demeter during spring and summer, hence the birds and the flowers and the sunlight. And she has to be with me in fall and winter as my wife. So the 6-6, I call it the half. I'm going to age myself right now. Years ago, Eddie Murphy had a comedy special called Raw. And it was in the 80s where women were getting half of their husband's estates. And the joke was this woman came from like the jungles of nowhere and she knew no English. She married Eddie Murphy and she knew one word, half. Half. And the whole joke was half. Women get half. And this was huge back in the day. Where you have Pluto, half. You get no closure. You get no ending. You get nothing. And you're deserving nothing. And you're entitled to nothing. Half. Because the criminal, the devil, God, whatever you believe, wants his share because you got to pay up. So depending on the house, the sign, and of course the aspects, the person will have half in a certain way. But you can pretty much bet, especially in transits, when there is a transit of Pluto, that person's not going to get closure. Why did he leave? Why'd they fire me? Why'd they rob my car? You are entitled to nothing. The fact that you don't die, ironically, Pluto rules death, so you can, is enough. You get no explanation. You are not entitled. So it's a part of the chart that is, the psychology is very dark. And what's the phrase of Scorpio? I desire. So Scorpio and Taurus, we're now in the 2-8 axis. The 2-8 axis is material. Material doesn't have to be money. I teach clients that there's 5 currencies in the earthly world: money, time, sex, food, drugs, alcohol, and health and illness. This is your currency in this world, with time is attention and some power. And so people oftentimes think that the 2-8 axis is financial only. It's not. You can take and desire and manipulate and have anything that's in the earthly currency. Values, for instance, is in the 2nd house at a high level consciousness, right? So be ample in your thinking when you're working with these archetypes and these planets and these energies. Don't just say, oh, this person, it's not necessarily true that if someone has Pluto in the 2nd, that they're probably very much possessive of what they have financially, but maybe they also have such a rigid value system that now something comes in the world and blows it up in their face, and all of a sudden it's not what they used to value. So think of half, not only financially. However, the 2-8 axis, which is Taurus, Scorpio, is the monetary. So the I have and the I desire. What I have, I want to keep, and what I don't have, I desire. We are unsatiable. We are never satisfied. Whatever's going on in the 2-8 axis is our demise, human beings' demise as a species. So now add to that the Venus, add to that the Pluto, add whatever you have in the 2-8, and you start to see that that is the most important axis in the whole chart. I have a video on my YouTube channel on the 2-8 axis. It's short, I recommend it. Because what's on the cusp tells you what people will totally violate. It's a very fascinating axis in the chart. And because that's the way that we move in society, what I have, what I get, what I take, what I give you, whether it's material, whether it's sexual, this is our demise as humans. And it is what nobody wants to talk about. Desires and judgments and money and sex and all the goodies. That's our currency. So it's a very, very, very important placement just on an axis, regardless of where Pluto is, okay? So let me tell you about the glyph. Hold on. You guys know this symbol, right? Okay. So this veil of Maya keeps us from ourself. Pluto has the exact same veil. Same veil, same drop. So here's the cross of matter that has to do with the material world, the currencies I mentioned, the veil that keeps us from ourselves. The purpose of Pluto in your chart, ultimately, this devil that we all hate, is to keep us from self-annihilation, from self-destruction, from absolute corruption of ourselves towards ourselves. It's a fascinating archetype. So we don't have access to all of our shadow aspects, all of our desires. We're surely not honest with ourselves about our sins, about hell, all the things that you know we're sold in religion or myth or otherwise. So something is taken from us, and what is inevitably what you hear after someone's divorce or their cancer or their accident. It was the best thing that ever happened. Without that, I would have never learned XYZ. I would have never met this. I would have never gone here. So we create a devil. We create this crime. We love the criminal because it saves us from our self-destructive nature, because we are greedy and we want nothing more than to possess everything. So this is greed. It's a gluttony. It's everything. It's all of this all-encompassing, deadly sin, desires, nature, shadow aspects that we think we are not, and we project onto others. It is a gift that we have this in our psyche. Now, your devil or your criminal is going to continue showing up over and over and over in this house where you're at. Now, what else is it? It's not just bad. It's a powerful position. It's a leadership position. It could be a very sexual placement. And we'll go through the houses with the I am statements. But there is probably 99.999% of people are going to encounter half, a lack of closure, an ending, abrupt, no explanation in that part of their chart. And that could be, again, a divorce, a betrayal, a bankruptcy, whatever it is, linked to that, an illness. So it's a very, very marked placement. But the glyph is very symbolic. So anytime you see like a veil, the Maya, the illusion, so that would be the Neptune that keeps us from our God, the Jupiter, you're in Pluto underworld territory. So in this type of philosophy, heaven and hell is here. Heaven and hell is within us. You see that in Kabbalah, you see that in astrology, you see that in all of these esoteric, because of this. It's here, it's in your head. And there's usually a very, very, very strong judgment linked to it. But years ago, when I was teaching at the university, I had a student who had this archetype reverse. Her mother was a churchgoer. Her mother was the Virgin Mary. Her mother had not had sex since her father died 50 years earlier, blah, blah, blah. So what was this girl? The devil. I'm the devil, I'm Satan. She works at the strip club. She is living the archetype. So this is where you see the 0 to 100. If there is a virgin on the scene, there is a prostitute. And if you're the prostitute, someone in your house is the virgin. So years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a therapist, and she's like, the girl moved in with her mother and she hasn't had sex. I said, oh, her mother must be a whore. She's like, how'd you know? I said, because she's virginal. The mother that they live together takes all the energy. So the system speaks. There's only 100% in the system. And so if you're this archetype in one way or the other, there's only enough room for the other archetype, right? So you've got to see it from the victim or the innocent, which is another word for Neptune, the child, the delusional little Persephone, frolicking with her mom. And then she grows up into the wife of Hades. Now, the myths do indicate that she actually really enjoys being the wife of Hades. She likes being away from her mother. She likes having the underworld, which is her reign, her domain. She has power there. And so Thanksgiving 101, no one wants to go home, right? Because you don't want to go home from where you went to, because low consciousness, you're seeing yourself. But there's something about being individuated. There's something about manning your fires and owning your power and being your own leader in your life. That is the goal, basically, of life, is to individuate. And it's Pluto's domain. Any questions?
Yeah, the earthly currency, money, time, sex, food, drugs, alcohol, and what was the last one?
Health and illness. So when you see any sort of 0 to 100 or greed or gluttony with these 5, there's an imbalance and Pluto is coming. And then you can see by sign or by where in the chart, it's most probably going to hit. Transits are different, and you'll see the transits. But just know that there's that I have of Taurus and I desire of Pluto. So I'll give you a little metaphysical quickie lesson. You guys all know me, so you know my typical quotes. But the only element humans are in charge of is fire. Fire is through the eyes. We lose our fire from what comes in through our senses, primarily the eyes. The eyes, as what's called in the Vedas, the tanmantras, the subtle energies or faculties, is fire is in the eyes. Fire is the third chakra. You give your power, your fire, through what enters here, what you desire. That's why in a lot of myths, you'll see that next week with Lilith, a lot of the gods or goddesses, they rip out their eyes because they understand that if they continue in any senses way to connect to the external world, they're constantly giving away their power. And we don't know how to be in attention. We don't know how to say a no without justification, permission, or excuses. We don't know how to be just enough, satisfied. So Pluto comes to save the day. And that's the area usually that I have discovered that happened. So I'll give you an example that happened yesterday. I had a client and he's like, oh, I developed a rash right here on his right arm. And he had a friend over. Well, his friend, he gave her the bed and he slept on the inflatable mattress. He said everything was fine. Everything was not fine. She leaves, he develops a rash, and he complained about one thing, that she had to take a work call that took away 4 hours. So you see time, and he creates this rash, red rash, fire, frustration, anger. I need to push you out of my space. This is my domain. And so he was calling about his cat. His cat is sick, has an enlarged heart. A heart is about my home. He wants her out of his home. He wants to have and desires back his domain. All of this is connected. So the currency in that particular commentary was time with his friend, but it was the illness between him and his animal. And then the second thing he says is, oh, my friends invited me to XYZ trip, but because my cat is sick, I'm probably not going to go. And I know enough about this client to know it has nothing to do with the cat. He doesn't like what the other 3 people have that he can't have access to. So he's using the currency of illness with the cat to get out of saying no. Justification, permission, excuses. That's what we want. No one wants to just hold the tension of saying, no, it doesn't work for me. So we create problems in these areas. So we have an excuse, an earthly excuse to come from the underworld and say, you know, I can't, I'm sick. My husband left, I'm fill in the blank. So you start to see how all of it relates. And of course, in this case, it was health and illness, so it affects the body or the mind. But Pluto is a very, very powerful archetype. And honestly, it's our friend. We just haven't learned to see it that way. We see it as if we're taking something. So our nature is greedy and gluttonous, all or none. I say omnipotent or non-important. And so I deal with a lot of people that, oh, I don't feel I'm enough, or it's never enough, or I'm never enough. And it's Pluto that teaches you sufficiency. It's 6 pomegranates, it's enough. You don't need all of it. You don't need to desire all of it. So we get in our own way, and this archetype helps us understand that in that area, we may have less or have. But the irony, here's the other side, is Pluto rules the riches. Where you have Pluto, you have riches. And sometimes, like in the second, it could be a ton of wealth. So it's not always money. That is not the only currency. But Pluto, the word Pluto, the god Pluto, is the god of minerals and wealth. And for those in the class that love the body, anything to do with a mineral imbalance is linked to Pluto. So any mineral imbalance physically is linked to that. And that would be linked to more like a sixth house illness thing. But if somebody comes to you with some sort of mineral issue, it could be a mineral like a diamond that got robbed. That could be one too. But I'm talking about health-wise. And in the subconscious, Pluto is linked to transitions and is linked to the birth story. So if nothing else, you ask about the birth story. The birth story, whatever they know, will give you an insight as to how they transition and how the devil shows up. Because you leave Neptune, the womb, supposed intact, the Demeter and Persephone little intoxication, which that wasn't healthy and neither was your womb, but you think it was intact. You get ripped, you get raped when you're forced through the birth canal or C-section. So that Pluto story, if they know something about their birth and the Pluto in their chart, are related. Part of your job is to find out the essence of that. And again, I'm talking psychologically, subconsciously, I'm giving you a lot of information, but on the chart, half Pluto, minerals, money, wealth, leadership, desires, greed, sex, power, control, will, all the goods. Any questions? Good, right? Okay, so let's go through the houses and we're going to use the I statement. Okay, so Pluto is the I desire. So the desires are anything that enters through our senses, anything that is human, anything that we think is going to make us happy, so you have an idea of this, right? So we're talking lust and envy and greed and gluttony and pride and all of that. Linked to the house is going to be the energy that surrounds it. So Pluto in the first, if it's an Aries and it's an I am, there's going to be a very strong power struggle, wanting ultimate power, absolute power. I am the alpha, the omega, the end all be all. And I think, Nicole, you have that, I think. And so yes. I was married to someone like that. And mind you, I'm like that in my 10th house. So it's not like I don't have it. I just have it in a different placement, but you start to see where that person, so it could be in your body. It could be obviously in your personality. It can be obviously physically, right? And so then you layer the desire. If that's a power placement, my identity, what I am, I can use and will use whatever tools of those shadows, of those masks, of the power, the sex, the lust, the envy, the control, all of these desires, Pluto words, to get to my identity, to get what I desire through my physical, through my personal. That's why you see how self-destructive it could be. So I was married to a trans man who had that. Talk about identity, to completely say, God, you're wrong, and flip over the identity. I mean, you can see the level of I am in a behavior like that, a gender switch. And again, there's no judgment about who does that and why, but that's a way that it can manifest. Doesn't mean that obviously everybody with Pluto in their first. I had a business partner who had Pluto in the first, and she was very seductress. So it's a very seductress placement. If you think that Persephone is god of the underworld, these things that are deemed on the sideline of society, prostitution, seductress, the mistress, drug dealers, the dark web, that kind of stuff, that's the essence, that's the currency. Hence, one of the currencies being sex, or the power through that. So you can see that the identity in itself becomes what lures. The second, so it's a Taurus, it's an I have. My desires is linked to what I have. What I have gives me my power, gives me my leadership. And again, it does not have to be money, although it is a money house. It could be a value system. It could be, depending on the sign, let's say we're in Cancer, it could be my family, right? The wealth generated through a family lineage. That could be, so you start to piece it together. In the third, it's the intellect or the I think. So maybe these people are, I've said this before, the third house could be like a principal, a school principal. They're the leader in the elementary, middle, or high school, K through 12. But perhaps they only think that their way is the right way. And again, 0 to 100, people don't always show the devil. The example of my client or my student who works as a stripper and her mom is the virgin. Remember that if you see the other side, it's the same. So it's not that people are always so blatant. Another word for Pluto is manipulative, or in my language, covert power. Where you have Pluto, you are very covert. It's rare to be overt with a Pluto. It's a manipulation, it's a power, it's a control, it's subtle, or could be subtle, interpreted. So it has a very strong manipulative energy around it. And sometimes that's why the hit is so abrasive or so abrupt, because the person is, but I'm such a good person, or I did everything right? Because it was such a manipulative, dark edge of their existence that, again, like the veil, we're not aware of it. This could also be in the siblings position. A person who loses a sibling, because again, we're talking death. Pluto in the third could be they lose a sibling, or they have a sibling with a lot of money. Remember, Pluto is wealth. There's a lot of wealth. He is god of wealth. So even though Zeus or Jupiter is god of abundance, wealth is Pluto. Think of the gold and the mines and everything stored underneath. So that's your goal too in your psyche, if it comes out to quote unquote save your life and make it the best thing that ever happened. Pluto in the fourth. Pluto in the fourth is a very marked placement. People who have Pluto in the fourth come to break generational and ancestral patterns. They come to basically give the middle finger to their family and say, no more of that. We're changing. Doesn't mean that they won't take on a different sin, but that placement, those people tend to leave home early. They tend to carve their own road that is different than the generational pattern or the deadly sin or the unspoken rule or the currency of that family. So it's a very, very marked placement. Where it is in the fourth, remember the fourth is a lifetime house. If it's early on, it could have been an illness, for instance. Pluto also rules Cancer, specifically reproductive cancers. So an example, someone who has a very early, a Pluto close to the cusp, very young, they themselves could have had some sort of cancer, a childhood leukemia, or one of their parents, mom could have had cervical cancer, that changed the trajectory. But there is a change in the trajectory of the snow globe, of what is considered to be the norm in that family. If it's later on in life, then it could be something that they finally speak up about later on in life. So Pluto in the fifth is will. So you can imagine the power placement that Pluto in the fifth is. Usually the fifth house, because it is entrepreneurial adventures or Olympian sort of stamina, these people are ready. Any strong placements in the fifth are already going to have that sort of energy. It could also mean the loss of a child, not necessarily young. It could be later on in life. Saturn and Pluto in the fifth are tough placements because they could represent adult children passing. depending again, where in the chart and other aspects. It doesn't have to be, but it's one of those placements that's tough. And it could be that their business goes under, bankruptcy. Pluto rules, even though it's not the 12th house, the 12th house rules bankruptcy, mental institutions, jails, right? So anything in society that we keep the no-gooders, right? We put them away. They're the criminal. There is an element of that energy wherever you have Pluto. So a Pluto in the 10th, which is not my case, but in my case, it was the depth psychology work. I could have worked in prisons. That could have been a placement for my profession, where I did this work in criminal psychology. So remember, there's different layers. I'm giving you sort of like the psychology of what brings someone to where they end up, but it could be various things. So if Pluto in the 5th house of entrepreneurial, you would expect that they work and they make a lot of money. You could deduce that. And if it's a half story, that they lose everything, but they regain it. So maybe you have a bankruptcy, but then you rebuild. So that kind of trajectory could be that. Pluto in the 6th. This is a perfection, Virgo, judgmental placement. Pluto in the 6th, a lot of times is Cancer. And if it's in Scorpio, and there was a generation that obviously had Pluto in Scorpio, it could easily be reproductive cancer. I had a client, oh my God, this girl, I have to see if I have her chart, had 6 or 7 planets in the 6th house, all in Scorpio. And I'm 99% sure that Pluto was there. And I was like, what the hell? And she was young. I'm like, you have got to go to the OBGYN. Like, you can never not go to the OBGYN. And I was like, just going crazy. Like, what the hell? What the hell? What does this girl have? Like, I was like, I go, you don't want kids? She's like, yeah, I want kids. I said, then in talking to her mother had 6 miscarriages before she had her. All of those dead souls were on her. The son with all of the dead kids that she was now carrying as the sole living child from all the miscarriages. Talk about moment of conception and your mother putting on. And I said, and I even asked the mother, I said, what were you thinking? She's like, please get pregnant, please get pregnant, please get pregnant. When she got pregnant, and the girl has, find that chart because it's fascinating. I was like, wow. So there's so many layers, but when you have so much in Scorpio, such in a stellium, in a house of health, or in a house of death, like, it has to mean something. And there's a story. And if you can get to the story, even great. But there was something. That girl, whether she knows it or not, is at very much of risk for some reproductive cancers, or she's got to be very careful during sex. She can obviously get STDs. So you start to piece it. Health house, Pluto, so sex or lust or envy or an illness. And in Scorpio, and all of that Scorpio, not just Pluto in the 6th, but all of that Scorpio, there's an energy there that's very concentrated that she's here to work through her body. Or work. That would be a person with impeccable, I shouldn't say impeccable work ethic, but wants to be on time, wants to control, would be an amazing leader. Like, with all that Scorpio, they want to be in control of everything. Doesn't mean they can't do shady shit, but you would see that they would come through in their work. And she did. She was apparently really high up for such a young age. So Pluto in the 7th, we're talking about balance. No balance. With Pluto in the 7th. Usually 99% of the time with someone who has Pluto in the 7th, divorce or widow is almost guaranteed. That's a very strong placement. Libra per se, the 7th house per se, is usually about learning some lesson when you have a hard placement, and marriage obviously is the focal point. Could be friends too. You could have a husband that is very wealthy with Pluto in the 7th. That version's nicer. And Pluto in the 7th, it could be that you have a person. I did a session for a couple. They could not live together. These two people, they loved each other, but she needed to be in her home country and he needed to be in his home country. So I did their individual chart, and then I did their combined chart. And I think the combined chart was ruled by Pluto touching the ascendant. And I was like, 6 months. You guys need to be 6 months in one place, 6 months in another, one solution. That's how you trick the archetypes. You use the myth and the meaning of the myth to guide the session with suggestions on how to overcome the problem, right? It's trick. So I said to them, 6 months and 6 months using the Pluto, or sleep in separate rooms if you have to be together. They had small kids, so I think they had to be close by, or have a section of your year separate from one another. You go on one vacation, he goes on another vacation. So this idea of half is important in Pluto in the 7th, because that way there's that space. The person goes, quote unquote, back home and then comes back to the underworld. So you learn to navigate the archetypes if the client is willing, because of the myths. So Pluto in the 7th. Pluto in the 7th can also be that they have 2 homes, they live in 2 different places, but usually something so strong. And there could be a very strong manipulative partner. It could also be a partner that's into illegal stuff. So years ago, I had a client and she came, and I'm pretty sure she had Pluto in the 7th, and there was something transiting. I think transiting the 12th was Saturn. And I said, did your husband do shady shit? She goes, yeah. And I said, yeah, he's going to jail. And he did. So it could be that. Remember, levels of consciousness. We're talking Stinger, Scorpion, all the way up to Phoenix and Eagle. So you can shift your perspective, but that obviously takes some growth. Pluto in the 8th, that's a hard aspect. There's some underlying death, either a death wish, a subconscious desire for what's called Thanatos. Freud took the god of death and made it the death wish or the death drive that we all have. That's a very strong death drive. So maybe those people are very reckless. Maybe they engage in unhealthy sexual behaviors or recklessness activities, thrill, adrenaline type of things. That is a subconscious death drive. That could be someone that dies of cancer. That could be someone that that has an inheritance, a very big inheritance. Jupiter and Pluto in the 8th tends to be an inheritance. Pluto bigger actually than Jupiter. Pluto in the 9th. Pluto in the 9th is a fascinating placement. I love it. These people want to throw out any conventional, traditional religion or belief system. And they oftentimes become like, I'll just use New Age as an example. In New Age, or they leave the religion of the family and they go seek something else. They move into an ashram. They're seeking some bigger meaning. This is an existential placement. These people have the capacities to be gurus. It could be a good guru, or it could be a power hungry guru. You decide, and other placements will tell you, but they want to kind of throw out the convention. These people tend to struggle with like the traditional belief system that was given to them in childhood. Christianity or Judaism, they want talk about paving a new territory. So if you think of, go back to the myth of Persephone and Demeter, and the crack, she's raped by Hades. I forgot to tell you an important little minute detail. Pluto was bored. He was hanging out in the underworld. He's a loner. He doesn't like people. It's ironic that Scorpio is such a sexual placement, because Pluto, of all the gods, only had one wife. So it's an interesting conundrum. So maybe sex is sex, but commitment, if you go back to the moon In Scorpio, read my mind, you better know what I want. My mom knew everything I needed, you should too, as a partner. Doesn't mean that sex doesn't matter as a whatever, but emotionally, they're not people that easily just give their heart over. So he was hanging out in the underworld bored. And what he did was he made a crack in the earth and he ripped her through the crack. So this is the crack. This is that crack in the psyche where things enter, you keep hidden, but they're desires that you would follow if you could get away with it, type of thing. So that's why you see people, I'm so Puritan, and really they're not, or I'm, the whore on the street, but really inside they're just honest or quality people. So this idea of morality gets very questioned in this. So the Egyptians have such a great practice, or mythologically a great practice, which is when you would die, they would put your heart on one side of the scales and a feather. And so it's not about the currency that you used in the world, let's say your Puritan currency, it's about your heart. And so this isn't very clear, because you can have an honest trickster, you can have a real horrible pastor that runs a church with a smile on his face for 80 years. So these are very, very, very dark recesses of the psyche that are hard to access. That's why the veil. Pluto in the 10th, leadership, 10th house is mother. So of course, a very powerful or a figure of a mother that's, all encompassing, similar to a Demeter. It could be a leadership role that you have a lot of power, money or financial positions of ambition or of work that provide a lot of wealth. There's obviously a capacity to be an authoritative or authoritarian ruler that's not very considerate or compassionate. Pluto in the 11th. Pluto in the 11th is an interesting placement, because now you're talking about the change agent, which is it's a Uranus house, right? It's an Aquarius house, and Pluto's in there. So similar to the 4th, they tend to be the change agent, or the one that creates subtly, not in a Uranus chaos rebellion way, but in a subtle, covert way, start chipping at the knowledge. Remember, it's I know, that people kind of just gratuitously buy into as the norm, and they can just sort of start chipping away so that people start to think differently. So it's a change agent because it's two of them work together, the Uranus and Pluto, but it's more subtle. It's not to say that it can't be destructive. Obviously, Pluto is destructive, but it's not maybe as rebellious or chaotic at the surface seeming. Pluto in the 12th. Pluto in the 12th is a very difficult placement. These people really, really, really do not have like a flashlight onto their psyche. And without some shadow work, without some massive projection, it is very difficult to really understand the depths of your psyche. There might be suicide tendencies, there might be depressive tendencies, there might be bankrupt tendencies, there might be embezzlement tendencies, mental health issues, but they're always victim. They don't understand that, or this could happen to them. Think of, they get embezzled from their partner, takes all their money, and then they're the victim. It's a very difficult house, because now you're talking about Neptune and Pluto, the combination where the criminal, I'm the victim always in a criminal relationship. So you start to see how these archetypes work together, and it's more than just, oh, Pluto in the 12th, you can go to jail. Yeah, you can, or you can end up in a mental hospital, but why? There's a very, very difficult, obscure essence to the psyche, to the darkness of the psyche. These people could be religious, total, like devout religious people, because, oh my God, the devil is the devil, but they can't understand that they're the devil, and through their manipulation. This placement in a weird, strange way is like an Al-Anon personality. I'm a believer that person in AA is healthier than the person in Al-Anon. This is like an Al-Anon. I'm the victim from the addict. I save them. I rescue them. But really what I need is for them to stay sick so I have a purpose. So you start to see the dysfunction of the thinking when you really start to understand the placement and the archetype and the myth. That's why I really hone in on that. Any questions? Okay, so let's see. Sharon has in Leo. Okay, so the speed of Pluto is between 12 and 24 years. So think of that. If you have a kid that's 12 or 24 years difference, how much life has changed between each of these. So that's going to be a big social or economic or religious, some worldwide theme that you see. In the years of Pluto and Leo, there was an emergence, and it can go either way. And of course, it depends on other aspects in the transits and of course the person's chart, but I'm just talking now sort of societally. These were leaders that were egomaniacs, like the Castros, okay? So you see the desire or the emergence of this type of leader or this issue in society, or you see the destruction of it, and you start to see how the generations work in tandem. Okay. Anybody Virgo? I'm trying to think if I have anybody that might be Virgo.
Yeah, mine is, oh no, mine is Libra in the first
Right
house, which is
before
Virgo.
us. Who do we know that? Anyone that we know that's like 60? I can't think of anyone. So you start to figure out the ages, right? So when you do a reading, it's not that you negate Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. You don't. But you have to keep in mind that generationally. So people love this, especially beginning astrologers. They're like, oh, I met a guy. Oh my God, we have the same Pluto, we have the same Uranus. Yeah, everybody does in your generation, right? So just keep that in mind, because that's a very common misstep. Anyway, Pluto in Virgo is going to be more about purity or judgmental, you know, the OCD generation, and everything had to be super clean and I'm so perfect and all of that. Then our generation with the Libra. So we were like, no marriage or marriage no longer, no more balance within a marital structure. We're going to change the archetype of that. And that's when the 50% sort of divorce height started going up. Then Scorpio. Anyone Scorpio? Our girls are Sag. Jen, trying to think. Is Michelle Scorpio? Yeah, Michelle Scorpio. Okay, so this generation is, this is where you see no more slut shaming, right? We're eliminating slut shaming. We're eliminating power, or an attempt to eliminate power, or things to do with that desires are bad, or that we have to fit conventional, you know, we're going to destroy those sort of social norms. And then our girls are Sag. And this particular generation has a very interesting stellium. Pluto Chiron, Abby has, Sophia has, or the boys, my boys have Pluto Chiron Black Moon. But this generation, most of them have Pluto Chiron Black Moon all in Sag. In Abby's case, it's in Capricorn. But that stellium, or those two, are speaking generationally as well. So that's when you start getting more into looking at charts. You're going to see all the kids in that generation, Pluto, Chiron, Black Moon. There's a very dark spot. There's a very deep wound, trauma, big word, right? So here you see Sagittarius. This is like deconstructing faith, independence, really what a traditional religious or spiritual foundation is. that's not of importance to this generation. Then you have Capricorn. That's the one now. They're the 9/11 generation. The word of Pluto Capricorn is terrorism. That's all they know. They do not know a world without terror, without terrorism, without now COVID, like this sort of thing that there's this invisible enemy. Okay. So of course there's power. They want to deconstruct or tumble any ambition, any sort of conventional structure, anything that might be privileged. That's also words that you hear with Pluto in Capricorn. So because we're alive, obviously, over many Plutos, we have judgments about the generational Pluto that's going on, right? So it's not that we can do anything about it. It's just that we start to identify, oh, that's a generational thematic, and it comes from the Pluto. And then in about 2 years, Pluto's going into Aquarius. That's going to be pretty amazing. It's going to be crazy chaos. So you're having destruction, you're having chaos, rebellion of all structures. So the United States, it's worthy of looking at, so you can kind of understand what's happening in this nonsense of the world. So here's Pluto. It's at the exact degree 27 to 27. And people will say to me, how long is this going to continue? This is breaking all of the structures. It's in the second house of money, of wealth, of status, of leadership, of ambition, of values. All of our fundamental values as a country are being challenged. This is a Pluto. You in your life will never, ever have a Pluto conjunct because it's 264 years. But as a country, there it is. And until this lets up, we are not going to see. And what's coming isn't, I don't think, any better, because then Pluto's going to move into Aquarius, which is over the South Node, and whatever's left standing is going to be tumbled. So we've got years of this. But when we start to see why things are happening, this is really where shadow work is pertinent. Where are we responsible from previous things or themes or thoughts or things that we did when we were in our Pluto generation that now we're, again, pay the price? So we're not guilty of things as they show up. So if you defy marital structure that used to be sort of like the pillar of a community, if you deny religious structure that used to be what all European towns were built around the church, then it moved to government. Now you're saying, well, any structure, government or otherwise. I mean, you could see the demise. In the Vedas, it's called the Kali Yuga, Kali being the god of destruction. It's the sister to Pluto. And you understand, if you keep knocking down structures, and in the Vedas it talks about what we're going through now, the Kali Yuga, as a three-legged stool. Well, with all the previous Plutos, if we knock down and knock down and knock down a stool, well, of course the whole structure is going to tumble. I mean, we can't live ignorantly. We can, to what our contribution was, but we inherited the chart, we inherited everything. It's not like, oh, us are alone to blame, but we start to see how these planets build a story. And you'll hear me often say, what you buy at the store this morning is what you're going to eat for dinner. We are eating for dinner what started way back. So I guess my parents would be Cancer because they're older than Sharon, and that's probably all. I doubt. I mean, there might be some people obviously that are living that are Pluto Gemini, but you start to see how everything, and that is just a teaching of astrology in general. All cycles repeat. The thing is that we will never see a Pluto cycle in our life that repeated. So we take it as a one and done deal. Oh, we got screwed over. But if you really start to look at everything cyclical, starting with the moon, then the sun, then Mercury, etc., you start to see all of this is repeated over and over and over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So this is a really interesting thing that we're living now. And Uranus also has a placement because it's going to be in Gemini. Not yet, but when that matches. So now you're going to have Pluto and Uranus, and hence that program of the changing of the gods. So these are the criminals in our mind. These are the structures that we ourselves want, sometimes with valid reason, to destroy. This is our manipulation. This is our covert power. This is our envy. This is our greed. This is what makes the human human. And so things that remove veils so that we can see what is clearly. And then we talk about being woke, being awakened to, oh my God, that was the best thing that ever happened because it showed me X, Y, Z. So you start to see why these words and why these things are spoken about. But the devil, in terms of Christianity, was covered with fire, right? Hell, all you see is a bunch of flames. Because subconsciously the church wanted you to be afraid of your third chakra, of your power, of your fire. That's why Joseph Campbell will say, the cave you dare to enter holds your gold, right? If you enter hell through your Pluto and you really unmask that archetype and that planet, you will find your gold, hence why he's the god of wealth. So not only money, but the power. So you start to see why these archetypes, why these myths, why these stories start to say the same thing over and over, no matter what the tradition. Because it's your self-worth, it's your power, it's your ability to say no. It's not needing an excuse to be liked. It's saying, no, that doesn't work for me. All of that Pluto is viewed as, being mean or whatever it is, or Scorpio, is really that gold that keeps us self in some way. So the church, of course, layers these flames so that you won't even dare to enter. This is the myth of the Hydra. You've got one major jeweled Hydra head. So rewatch that video and see which one it is, and you'll see in your chart. Like mine is pride. There's no negating that in the 10th house, like obviously, So your placement of your Pluto will also indicate that main Hydra head, which is that main deadly sin. We have all of them, but that's where all of this starts to come together. Any questions?
Pluto is also my chart ruler. So it's in the first house.
Yeah, great question.
So yeah, I mean, I'm already hearing like, yeah, I do. I want to be in charge. I don't want anyone else to tell me what to do. That expresses itself in a lovely way as standing for personal sovereignty. And I'm curious of the implications of having also the Pluto be the chart ruler in the first house, because that seems kind of extra amplified.
So it's a great question. So if you have, and I think Sharon has Scorpio ascendant. So if you have a Scorpio ascendant and or Pluto as your ruler, there is going to be a wound around sexuality, rape, assault, unwanted attention sexually, and that could go one or the other, right? I'm going to use my sex to manipulate. No one's going to ever, kind of use my sex against me, but rather I'm going to rip your head off with it, or I am going to retreat so into that virgin. I'm the good girl. I can't even hear the word, vagina. Like that's what you get with the Scorpio ascendant and or Pluto as the ruler. The Pluto as the ruler of the chart, so independent of the ascendant, is, remember I told you this is your birth story. So right off of your birth, there was something. So these are the typical examples, and you can figure out in your birth story how it relates. Mother's going through labor, and someone calls on the phone and says, oh, Uncle Jacob died. There is a life-death theme in that person all the time. It's me or you, it's life or death, it's black or white. I kill you or you kill me, and I'm gonna win. That's part of the sovereignty. That's part of, I have to be here so I have the perspective as the eagle to make sure you don't kill me first. It's a defense mechanism. So positions like yours, positions like mine in the 10th, I'm always in a leadership role, right? Because I have to better watch with my one eye open to make sure you don't screw me over. That was, and I don't think that I came out that way as a leader. I was actually a very good leader, but I wasn't the kindest leader. I was a bit of a bitch, you know, so there was always that, I'm going to use this to show you who's who, right? Until I understood what that was about. So the half, or the me, the us versus them, or the me versus you, it's a power planet. You're not going to lose. I mean, losing isn't an option. But what does the myth of the Hydra say? We rise by kneeling. And it's only when we kneel to this power that is so beyond, out of our control, because we are so blinded and veiled, that we actually dominate the archetype. It's the conundrum of all conundrums. So the specific placement of Pluto in the first as the ruler, and of course the node doesn't count, but if there were a Chiron here or Venus here, it wouldn't be the ruler. So it's obvious right after ruler. The birth story had some death associated it. It's not uncommon that the umbilical cord was wrapped around the baby shortly after coming home. So these are like the nuances of the chart and why the time is so important. The first house is one of those houses because this is your birth time, that this is kind of like when you get home. So there's a chunk of time. The death could have happened, I don't know, I'd have to check the degrees. So here it's a 26 degree of Virgo. Okay, so we're talking years in. 13, maybe 14, 17, 15 to 18 years old, maybe there was a death. That might not have been the first death, but that's a death that's marked. Or a divorce, or someone leaves, or there's a bankruptcy. There's some marked in your psyche because of the degrees between 26 of Virgo and 13 of Pluto. But from a birth perspective, right off the chart, there's something, maybe a couple months home, where there is a fight. And remember, you're an infant, but it's stored in your subconscious. Wherever you have Pluto, you don't remember. It's the bottom of the freaking underworld, but it's there. And it is paying up and pay up and pay up and pay up. So it could be that your dad striked your mom. Your dad insulted your mom. You're in the crib next door and you're like, hell, if a man's ever going to talk to me like, wait, you don't know. And because energetically, until we're 14, we're under the umbrella of our parents, specifically the mother, your mother's shadow passed on to you. And like I tell clients, you come to solve your parent's shadow problem. I came to solve the problem that my mother had, that she didn't earn the money. So I went and earned the money and never let a man earn the money. That's what that is. It's so ridiculously subtle. And then we'll add when we talk next week about Black Moon. It is a very, very hard archetype. And we are just naturally not accepting that we are responsible for everything that's happening and we're never a victim, blah, blah, blah. So it's so hard. It's easier when it's a transit because you can tell the person, hey, this is coming, prepare. And then they think you're a genius. But it's not that you're a genius, it's that you understand that something's coming. You may not know exactly what it is. You give them the things related to the house, but it's a very, very difficult placement. And yours and mine are in very marked, overt spaces. Does not mean that it was overt, because it's an overt power currency. But that is part of the death story. The umbilical cord, someone died when your mom was bringing you to the world. Transitions are like death. So you're not, that's some of the times when you say that you do your your medicine, right? You're like, it's like you died and came back. That is your psychology. I have to die and come back. I have to die and come back. So you found a way that works for you, but it's still a psychological construct that you will buy into no matter what. Who else? Pluto's amazing. Jennifer. Ooh, in the 8th.
I know, that's what I was thinking.
Well, the good news is you're going to get some inheritance somewhere, so that's good. For a double Capricorn, I think that might matter. That's a good thing for you.
Her inheritance is still alive.
Okay, well, she could get it in living. Let's put it that way. It doesn't have to be during death. But good for her that she created you, Sharon. So Pluto in the 8th is a hard place. If it's the bottom of the ocean, I mean, if it's the bottom of the underworld, as the bottom of the underworld, the form of self-destruction or the death drive, which is already present in a Capricorn. Capricorn wants to kill everybody off and be the only ruler that ever existed, because the threat of Capricorn is that he got dethroned, right? So you're always vigilant to get dethroned. And in the 8th house of resources, luckily you're in business with someone who has zero knowledge about money, so you're in full control. But this could be, with one eye open, my business partner will take my money, right? That's one manifestation. 8th house is business partner, other people's money, partner, spouse, inheritance, something like that. But if you go to just the double Capricorn nature, that's already hyper vigilant of getting dethroned, and you add this layer of the chart, that's when you start to find the theme. There's just one theme. We're not that complicated, right? So all of us are power hungry criminals. Nicole in her way, me in my way, Jen in your way, Sharon in her way. That's what's so lovely about it. So I have a book, I don't know, it's going to come out. It's written and edited, but I don't know. But it's about consider the crime, not the criminal. The crime is what you're judging, and that judgment of that crime in the world is you, you know? So this is a very, very important placement psychologically. Now, psychically, girlfriend, get your spidey senses working. Pluto in the 8th is one of the most psychic placements, and then Mercury in the 12th. I mean, you're not freaking making things move because you don't feel like it, you know? So we'll have to get to work on that. But it's a very, very strong placement, Pluto. Absolutely. All Plutos are. But this is a hidden house. 4, 8, 12 are the subconscious houses. So Pluto in the 4, 8, 12 are always going to be the hardest. And they're the hardest to understand for themselves, right? Because it's a veil. And they want to keep that so hidden. Because at the end of the day, it's a Hydra head, right? It's nothing pleasant. These are our demons. So those houses are the hardest. And they tend to be more villainized, or they tend to have more villains in their story. So it goes either way. Yeah. No, Pluto's amazing. Let's look at Sharon. Sharon, you were in what, the 9th? In the 9th. Okay. So something about religion, spirituality, the way that it was shoved down your throat, the way that it was taught to you, there is a desire to absolutely not buy into that version of it. You would need to create your new path your own way. However, this placement is very, very dangerous from a spiritual perspective. Because if you're waiting for the criminal, and this is the house of God, if God is the criminal, then you're always the victim. And no one saves you, right? I mean, if the placement of God, Zeus, which is the 9th, is taken by the criminal and God becomes the criminal, that could be an existential crisis, a severe existential crisis. Who is going to save me? This is on me, because even God defrauded me. Even God abandoned me. So that's a very important placement. Hence why people want to leave the church or leave traditional religion, or they become the cult leader. because if God's a fraud, well, I might as well cash in. That's in the negative way that obviously, you know how I feel about that. But it's also the potentiality to get defrauded religiously. Because you have to prove God is a fraud. You have to prove that God doesn't save you and take care of you. So going back to that map of Neptune, Pluto, if Pluto's the devil and you're the victim, well, then Zeus should come and save you. And yes, you have a Zeus here, but in the house of Zeus, you're making the devil the god, and the god is the devil. So there's an interesting psychology there on how you work with those two archetypes. That's interesting. And who else? If missing anyone, it's just us. Okay, I think that is all I have. I made some notes. Let me see if I. Oh, I don't know if I said this, but let me. It warrants saying it again in case I did. You need something to limit your power. You want absolute power in that section, in that sign, in that deadly sin, right? I desire. Ultimately, it's power, will, ultimate destruction of everything. So it's you. We create the Pluto, we create the hell, we create the devil so that we do not self-destruct. That is why it's such a tricky archetype. How do you sell that to someone? That they created XYZ, and you guys all know me, right? That's all I ever say. We create that devil so that we do not self-destruct, because none of us don't want to be in absolute power and absolute corruption. So you can pick the leader that you want that has had absolute power. That's you. You would, if you had the chance, you'd do it too. In your section, in your sign, in your sin. I'm not saying everybody wants to run the country, but that we create this to avoid self-destruction, because these things, hopefully, if the myth says we rise by kneeling, will hopefully humble us. But I know many people with a Pluto, they blame it on Santeria and evil eye, and they go, no responsibility. So it's not a given, but it would be nice if in your Pluto moments, you'd say, oh man, maybe I had something to do with this. So, any questions? Okay. So next week, I highly recommend, if you haven't watched the Pluto videos, to watch them. They're very, very, very important in your spiritual growth, in your personal development, besides the cool factor of astrology. We're going to do Black Moon, which will fall into Scorpio. So all that content is under the Scorpio module. And then we'll be specific about the Lilith, or the Black Moon version. And then when we do aspects, we will tie in Pluto Black Moon, because that relationship will obviously speak to that part of you that wants to just dominate. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Thanks, Francis.
Thanks, Sharon. Feel better.
Yeah,